Hello and welcome to our Friday lectures. So we'll have two short videos this week. We're going to be talking a little bit about some pushback that we get to the economic way of thinking. So to start, I'm going to recap kind of some of the big points from the week. We'll have a vision of some stuff we'll be learning about later in the semester, and then we'll respond to some criticisms of that. So one of the big things we've talked about this week is we have people making decisions and there's scarcity. We can't have everything we want. We're going to have to make choices. So we drew a diagram that has an x and a y axis, and we drew some kind of curve going across. Now first we drew a straight curve and we called that a budget constraint. So if we're choosing between burgers and bus rides, this is showing us the different choices we could make, combinations of burger and bus rides that would be within the budget that we have to spend. So a budget constraint is showing us that, one, there's scarcity. We can't buy as many burgers as we want. The most burgers we can buy is right here. Another thing that a budget constraint is showing us is that there's a trade-off, right? So if we want more burgers, it means we're going to have fewer bus rides. So for every burger we get, we're trading off some number of bus rides. In the example we used in class with Alfonso, a bus ride was 50 cents and a burger was $2. So you had to give up 4 bus rides to get one more burger. So there's that idea of trade-offs and giving something up. We specifically call that an opportunity cost. The things you give up to get the thing you want. Another thing we mentioned is that it's important to think in marginal terms. So we're looking at things from the perspective of, okay, we start there. What'll happen if we move this way a little bit? What'll happen if we move the other way along the budget constraint? What will that do? So a quick preview of something we'll talk about. When we're thinking about choices that people make, about what kind of things they want to buy, we'll use a budget constraint, and then there's this idea that you could actually have these curves that show different bundles of these goods, burgers and bus rides or whatever you have, and along this curve you're equally happy. And it's a curve, it's not a straight line, because kind of like when we talked about PPFs, we talked about there's this diminishing returns idea. We talked about it with consuming something when we used the idea of diminishing marginal utility. So we said if you get one piece of pizza when you're really hungry, you get a lot of utility, a lot of happiness from that, right? The second piece of pizza you still get a lot of utility from, but not quite as much. The third one, okay, you're still getting some utility, and you add more and more pieces of pizza on, and eventually you're not getting any more utility from it, right? So that was diminishing marginal utility. That's actually the reason why this sort of curve is shaped the way it is. Because we tend to want a mix of, say, burgers and bus rides, if that's our example. And so there would be a number of these curves here. And along the curve, it's showing us we're equally happy anywhere along that curve. We call them an indifference curve because you're indifferent where along that curve you are. But they're curved this way because we tend to want a mix of things because of diminishing marginal utility for each particular good. And so what we'll see later in the semester is that these indifference curves, we want to be as far this way as we can. As we go up and to the right, we're getting happier. So you're indifferent along each curve, but if you're going up from this curve to this one, you're getting happier. So what you want to do is you want to be on the highest curve you can be on. And there's curves down here too. And so a preview, there's one curve that just touches your budget constraint. That's going to be the highest curve you can be on. And so this is a mathematical solution that economists perform all the time, not something we're going to perform mathematically in this class in this sort of way, but what you're doing is you're maximizing utility, getting as much happiness as you can, subject to a budget constraint. So maximizing utility subject to a budget constraint is going to put us on an indifference curve that's as high as we can go, given that we have to be along this budget constraint. So we could think about moving that budget constraint because you have more money come in or the prices change, and it'll change what our answer is going to be, right? We're still going to pick the curve that is highest that's touching that budget constraint, but where that will be, the bundle of goods we choose to buy is going to be different. Now, so what we really talked about is the part in black, the budget constraint this week, right? The indifference curves, trying to get to the highest one. Hopefully that intuition is something that kind of makes sense, but we'll talk about it more as we get into consumer choice. But I preview it now because economists model this kind of decision all the time. We say that consumers are maximizing their utility subject to a budget constraint. We have fancy math that helps us actually figure out what the solution is for a given problem and tells us how much we expect people to buy of these different goods. So this is great. It allows economists to predict what people will do if we change their budget constraint because they have money come in. Maybe there's a pandemic special payment to help people. So everyone gets $1,000. How do we expect that $1,000 moving our budget constraints to change the way people buy different goods? We can predict that by solving that maximization problem. Now, one common pushback to economics in general, and this kind of problem specifically, is people don't think that way. You can have fancy math, you can draw it as charts and try to make it more approachable, but I mean, at the end of the day, no one is using fancy math to maximize their utility subject to a budget constraint when they go into the grocery store or when they're looking at products on Amazon. That's not how people think. And the point is well taken. I'm an economist, and I don't go into the grocery store with Lagrangian equations and figure out what bundle of goods is going to maximize my utility. So going through those steps and explicitly thinking that way is not how I approach the problem, and I'm trained in this. I'm an economist. Regular, everyday people definitely don't do this, right? So how do we respond to that criticism? It turns out people actually act most of the time as if they were solving this fancy math problem. So the model shows us things about behavior. People often act as if they were solving fancy math. Now, they don't do it because they know the math that's going on in the background. They do it because it's just part of their everyday decision, right? They're used to going to the grocery store and picking which products they want to buy, that they'll consume, that'll be the best for them, that'll make them the happiest. And again, that's one reason we actually use utility as the thing that we're maximizing in economics, because when people go and pick stuff to buy, they may not think in terms of utilities and utils and strange measurements and units, but they are thinking of, what do I want to buy? What am I drawn towards? What will make me the happiest? Sometimes it's a tough choice, right? Maybe you're buying a car and you're looking at these two different used cars, and one costs a little bit more money, but it has a lower mileage. The other one, it's in a little bit worse shape, but it looks like a fun car to drive, and it has higher mileage, so you might end up having to do quite a bit of repairs on it, but man, it would be fun to drive. It may be a really tough choice, right? You're not setting up a fancy math problem, but you are thinking about, okay, well, the first car would be more reliable. I'm less likely to have to put money into repairs later. The second car, man, it would feel good being behind the wheel of that and getting on an open road and going fast, right? So you are thinking about which of these choices will make me feel happier kind of in general. and you may be putting a lot of weight on your experience over the next short amount of time, or maybe you're thinking in the long term. And depending on the product, if you're buying a car, hopefully you're thinking a pretty long-term sort of thing. But if you're buying, picking a piece of candy at the grocery store, saying, should I get Skittles or Snickers? I mean, that's not a long-term decision. You're going to think about, what do I feel like eating right now because I'm about to eat it, and which one will make me happier? So we think in long term, we think in short term, depends on the product. We act as if we are doing this fancy math to maximize our utility, make us as happy as possible, subject to a budget constraint. Even though we don't think in terms of these charts, we don't think in terms of the fancy math with Lagrangian and calculus, but we act as if we did. So that is one big response to a common criticism of economic thinking. Well, people don't really think that way. Yeah, that's okay. This is a model that captures kind of the essence of the way people tend to act. And so it's a really helpful set of tools.